Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to another High Republic Phase 2 video here on Star Wars Lads. We are going to be doing our comic book wrap up for Phase 2 of the High Republic. We're going to give you a review of every single comic book series that was dropped and a couple of the one shots that were dropped here for the High Republic Phase 2. We'll do this normally like our book reviews, except we're not going to go in depth. We'll do each series and then give you our final thoughts and then move on to the next one. So we're going to dive into that. Before we do so, make sure you're hitting that like button, you're subscribing to the channel, and you're commenting below letting us know what you thought of this video, what you thought of Phase 2, what you thought of the Phase 2 comics. Let us know all that stuff down below. If you haven't checked out Path of Vengeance, our review is up on the channel, as well as Cataclysm, and we do have more videos coming for you guys throughout the next week and a half. We have a tier list for all of Phase 1 and 2. We also have an updated reading order for the High Republic, including Phase 2. And, of course, we have our review of the junior novels coming out as well, a joint review of both of those. So let's move into the first series. We're going to start with the Marvel series just titled The High Republic or The High Republic Phase 2. This is a series that ran for, 10 issues. It stars the main Jedi, Vildar Mack, as well as Maddie Catley, a Padawan, on Jedha, and builds up into the Battle of Jeddah and through the Battle of Jeddah. Sanak, what were your thoughts on this series written by Cavan Scott?
Yeah, I thought it was very good, filling out, coloring in the picture a little bit more. I think when we look at Path to Deceit into Convergence and then into the Battle of Jeddah, there's a good progression there. But Battle of Jeddah is such a big audio drama that sometimes I was like, I hear everything. I want to see Jeddah. Jeddah is one of the most visually rich planets that's been introduced in canon. I was really excited to see that this was going to take place where we get to see all these different force groups, these different force cults, and how they're gonna work together, how they're gonna fall apart, how the Path of the Open Hand is gonna come in and upend the whole situation. A big thing about this was the Herald, one of the characters introduced in Path of the Deceit. A lot of his story is in this, and he's fairly minor until Path of Vengeance. So this was a great read. I think I really enjoyed the art style. I really enjoyed seeing a lot of the Legends Force cults kind of be brought back and mixed in with some of the new canon ones. We got to see a little bit of the action that we saw in Battle of Jeddah and with the Irony and Irono Enforcer droids and whatever. Got to see the Nameless, got to see the Mother, got to see a lot of cool details there. The biggest thing for me was I enjoyed Matty, and she's definitely a run-on character. She just talks endlessly, kind of like how we do. And Vildar Mac had this very strong and interesting backstory. But seeing them kind of work together, seeing them go to the bar, enlightenment, and seeing all these things that we got in pieces of and kind of be put together in the comic was really great. But the cherry on top was seeing what was happening with the Jedi Protector statue, seeing how the history of Jeddah was also filled out, leading to that eventual destruction by all the people rioting. It was very cool to think that the Jedi, in a way, established Jeddah as one of their big bases in ancient times. Now that gets me excited for that story. But then to see that they're kind of a little bit more ostracized, not really appreciated as much as before compared to the other Force cults who obviously have their own issues with each other. And then on top of that, finally seeing it destroyed and then seeing inside the Jedi had hidden away some very important artifacts that the Path of the Open Hand was going to look for, right? So very interesting story. Definitely explains why that shot of Rogue One and that statue half buried is very striking. I really liked it. I also definitely enjoyed that these characters did eventually show up in Path of Vengeance, but we didn't have their story interrupted. We got to see everything happen before, through Battle of Jeddah, and once that was done, then they kind of moved on. Got to be some very strong supporting characters in that book. So Kevin Scott did a great job writing, very tight storytelling, lets you get a taste of everything else that you've read or haven't read yet, but still maintains its own story. So yeah, for me overall, I thought this was a 3.75 out of 5.
I enjoyed this series a lot too. I liked both the characters of Vildar and Maddie. I thought their dynamic worked really well. I also liked Olivia Zeveron. We got a nice introduction to her character as she's played up more in Path of Vengeance. I think here, when you're looking at the comics, this is as close to essential as the comics get for Phase 2. The story does tie in really tightly with the Battle of Jeddah, and there is some crossover between that, but there's also heavy crossover between this and the characters that ultimately show up in Path of Vengeance. So I did appreciate the way that was done. Kevin Scott is an excellent comic book writer as well. He finds a nice balance between text and visuals, which is something that some authors struggle with a lot of times when they come into the comic book medium. But Kevin Scott continues to do it really well here, and he has a good handle on what makes a solid High Republic comic, as he handled the entire Phase 1 series as well. So overall, I did really enjoy this series. It's a tighter read than the High Republic Phase 1. I don't know if it's necessarily better. The Phase 1 book goes on in a bunch of different directions. It's more varied. It has multiple different arcs, where this is one big arc, even though it's spread across 2 volumes. It's really just pre-Battle of Jeddah, post-Battle of Jeddah, during Battle of Jeddah. All of that is nice, but it adds a nice layer to it that is definitely referenced in a lot more stuff. I was also going to give this a 3.75. I think this is a really solid comic book and amongst the best of Phase 2 for sure. So let's move next into the next Marvel series, The Blade. The Blade is written by Charles Soule, and it is about Porter Engle, who is a big character in Light of the Jedi, Charles Soule's novel in the High Republic Phase 1. He is an older man than cooking for our main characters. But here we get a look at his earlier life, how he becomes the legend of the Blade, and ultimately we will lead it up to his exploits in a new series that will be following this. Sonic, what were your thoughts on the Blade?
It's a series that I find very fun to read, very exciting, and getting to see this much earlier look at him closer to his prime was exciting to me. I mean, the whole concept of it was very cool, and I really want to dig into it. But it's very disconnected from anything else in Phase 2. The Blade doesn't have anything to do with that. It's about the Bearish Vow, which was first introduced in Charles Soule's Darth Vader, the Dark Lord comic book series, which, hey, I'm not complaining. It's just not what I was expecting. And that's what's very unexpected and still very cool about this series. Obviously, we get to see this man, at this height, but we also get to see this brother sister foster relationship that's formed with Barish, and they're out on the frontier. They don't really have any connection to Coruscant or whoever else, the Pathfinders. They're kind of on their own. They're here to think as Jedi on the frontier. We can handle a lot of these diplomatic, political situations because the Force will guide us. And it's a story about seeing Porter kind of kick ass and have this very fluid fighting style, have these cool like monologues and one-liners. But the real thing is Barish, because Barish is more of the diplomat, the politician. She's the one who's trying to figure things out, let the Force guide her. And the story is about ultimately her making mistakes, that, not realizing that this entire conflict that they run into was artificial, right? In the end, it's just the service, just the young prince and his wife that was supposedly abducted, right? But it was all just a big plan for him to get in power because the mother would not give it up. And it's interesting to see these reels kind of be stacked up, seeing the mercenaries, seeing what the people are doing, seeing finding out that the wife wasn't abducted. She just went with her husband because she wanted to, because she loved him. And seeing all these levels, I can understand why Barish didn't understand what happened. And even that final reveal that the princess was not actually pregnant, that there's no real risk to her, that this is entirely a power play, it kind of brings her down to her knees. And it, in some ways, it leaves the story kind of very much on a cliffhanger, very much like incomplete. And the series does hint that Porter is having another one called The Broken Blade, which is cool. I'd like to see more of Porter. But the Bearish Vow is just comes as a result of her saying like, "Oh, I made all these mistakes." And having seen the prequel Jedi, having read so many Legends books, Jedi make a lot of mistakes. She was doing what she knew, what she could do, what the Force is guiding to. There just happened to be so many layers of deception. So I found it very intriguing that the very first Bearish vow from Bearish herself was because, she focused on her own thoughts, her own biases and whatever, and that's why she was going to disconnect herself from the Jedi Order until she finally found what was right for her, or right with her connection with the Force. It's certainly a choice. I really enjoyed the first three comics. The fourth one felt a little rushed, and then having that be kind of the finale was a little bit more of a solemn note. So I don't know. It's this is a tough one to really grade for me because I feel like, in a way, this is like the first part of maybe like a trilogy of stories with Porter before we get back to Phase 1 and Phase 3 timelines. So maybe just because of how wonderful the art style was, how fun it was, especially the first three issues, I'll give it like a 3.5 out of 5.
The blade for me was kind of what I was wanting from the whole phase 2 Quest of the Jedi phase. Like the blade had the most Western elements, it had the most ideas of the frontier, whether it's Porter going up against people in kind of a gunslinger way or taking down armies of enemies. There was a lot of stuff here that like projected the majesty of what it is to be an insanely powerful Jedi onto parts of the galaxy that have no idea what Jedi are or only heard myths about Jedi. And in that way, I really, really liked the Blade. I liked the relationship between Porter and Barish as well. I thought their relationship was super unique, something we haven't seen from Jedi very often. We've seen the like almost lover angle between Jedi. We've seen the very close friend angle. We've seen the student and teacher angle, but we haven't really seen a brother sister type relationship with Jedi, especially Jedi who consider themselves actually brother and sister. They are not blood related, but they do consider themselves brother and sister. I thought all of that worked really well. I do agree that the backdrop of the story here is not as interesting as the characters themselves. But I think all of the character work that's done here, and a lot of Charles Soule's work is very character focused. He does leave the backdrop to be a lot less interesting. Like the Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith stuff works mostly because of his dissection of Anakin and Vader, more so than what Vader's actually doing. And I think that is the same way in the Blade. It's not the war that they're a part of as much as it is the relationship between Barish and Porter and the way they play off of each other and the way they work as a dynamic duo. And I thought that was honestly really great. This it does feel incomplete because I agree with you. I think it's going to be at least two-part story, if not a three-part story that is leading up to his appearance in Light of the Jedi, but I can't wait to see what the Blade of Bardota is. This was actually my favorite of all the comics here, I would say, in Phase 2. I'd give this one a 4. I really like the Blade. I think it is definitely worth your time if you're interested in Charles Soule's work or Light of the Jedi characters. But to reiterate what Cynic said, this might be also the least essential of all of them. This one doesn't really connect to anything in Phase 2 outside of its main story. So let's move on to our next one, which we are going to talk about the Claudia Gray one shot Quest of the Jedi, named so for Phase 2, which was the subtitle of Phase 2, Quest of the Jedi. This story follows Aslan Rel, who's a character who appears throughout a lot of different things here, mostly in the Edge of Balance manga, but has been present in a couple of other books. Aslan Rel is doing some research into the past of some of the things that are causing the Nameless to work, and we get this story about these Jedi further into the past from even the 300 years before Phantom Menace story we get in this time period of Phase 2. Sonic, what were your thoughts here on Claudia Gray's first work in comics and her attempt here with Quest of the Jedi?
I think it was a solid step towards the comics. Does feel like she did play it a little safe. For me, I think seeing the like promotional art cover, seeing like these aliens with the Jedi and they're on like some just a little few like a small raft basically with like a huge tsunami around them. I was like, wow, this is gonna be like a very cool take on like almost a Western feel, but more aquatic instead of the desert. We're gonna be in this water and how that can like, lay someone stranded, very isolated, and what they managed to pull out of that. I thought that'd be very cool. And this quest I thought would be very significant to the story. It ultimately was not, right? It is a story about the Jedi at the end of their quest. They have hidden away this special jewel from this during conflict with the Sith, as one Jedi does, right? And this is a story that's taking place, I think, even earlier than Phase 2. I think it's 100 years before Phase 2. So yeah, I mean that made it even more interesting because I thought it would be more directly tied into the quest of the Jedi as a phase as a whole, but it in a way it is pretty standalone because it's only centered on this one piece, the jewel, which ultimately the Jedi at the end of the story they break it into two, and that ends up being taken away by the Master and the Apprentice to other sides of the galaxy. Even though they have to stop seeing each other, stop living and working together. It's to protect these jewels are put into the Rod of Seasons, into the Rod of Daybreak, despite their efforts of both going on their separate paths. Again, I don't think the story here is really great. You just kind of reach another civilization that is very disconnected with the forest. At one point, this was a very aquatic planet, but this crystal seeded the land and the water and blossomed into this very almost Earth-like planet. And when the Jedi land there, there's a castle, right? Yeah, they might be disconnected from the galaxy, but they're well developed. They just are mostly isolationist. And once they discover, like, oh wow, they're able to do these force techniques and art, and just looks so great, they find out it's being amplified by the stone. And the master meditates on it, realizes like, oh, he has a vision of like, this is also poisoning the planet, and it's poisoning the queen. And then they break it, and then she's kind of freed from that, and she gives her approval to take it away from the planet, which was the whole conflict with the people and the Jedi and with Master Vin, and they go their separate ways. It doesn't really feel like a big comic to me. I was hoping something more akin to the tone of like perhaps a Eye of the Storm 1, or at least Eye of Storm 2, right? This one just felt like a very general story. Great. It's great that we got some understanding of how this stone, why it was able to control people. It was able to affect regular species instead of just these nameless. But at the same time, I still don't understand why specifically this stone has an effect, has a controlling effect on the nameless. And I was hoping that this story would at least explain a little bit of that, if this is what the stone is going to be the central key for. But it was nice. I thought the art was interesting. I thought the story was fine. This is the one that I was most hyped for. I ultimately did not like it that much. I'll give it like a 3.25 out of 5.
I found The Quest of the Jedi to be a story that definitely tries to pay homage to Dark Horse's past. Like the art style, the text layout, the lettering, all of it really looks like a 90s Dark Horse comic. And I think that way they were really going for something. Claudia Gray brings back quite a few things from like her side of the High Republic. There's the Kyber Arch that's at the beginning with Aslan and putting like Kevmo Zink's lightsaber and all that on there, the crystal. There's a lot of things here that she tries to tie back, but again, like you were saying, there's not much connection here. It's kind of the origins of like where the crystals in the rods come from, and we'll probably get to see more of that later. I would assume these are characters kind of like how the Blade is written. This is a pushing off point, a spinning off point for these characters to ultimately have their story continued later on, where we get to see where they hid the crystals, how they ultimately became part of the rods. Stuff like that will be further developed here in the future. But I think as a one shot, I think it works fine. The one shots can usually be hit and miss, and I'm glad it didn't bite off a story that was too big for it to chew. I think you do get a nice little complete package here. It just does become a bit more forgettable than the rest of the initiative does, because it is a smaller scale story, something that's more simple. And ultimately, I did have a bit higher expectations for this just because it was Claudia Gray. It's not in any way a bad story, but I do think it is one of the more underwhelming ones, at least of Phase Two. I would also give this a 3.25. So let's move on to the third to last thing we'll be talking about. This is The High Republic, The Nameless Terror, The High Republic Adventures, The Nameless Terror by George Mann. This was a really solid 4-issue miniseries about Master Rock from the Quest for the Hidden City junior novel, also written by George Mann, as well as his apprentice Corran, and a bunch of other Jedi crash land, and they have to face off with the Nameless. So I thought this was a really interesting series. Sanak, what were your thoughts overall on the Nameless Terror?
Yeah, I will say for me, this was the strongest of the comics that I read. I really liked it. It's a very interesting story that I don't think is necessary to what we know. I mean, we have Path of Vengeance with Martyr Rogue kind of going retrieving these nameless eggs there, right? We don't see anything with Planet X, but we do get to see what are the results of coming back, possibly facing Jedi, the conflict that can arise from letting these nameless kind of go loose. Because a big point of this phase has been to say the nameless are dangerous, not just to Jedi, but to people who are unable to control them, right? Like a Markion, if he doesn't have these rods of seasoning and daybreak, would not be able to control these creatures, especially as they break out of their shell and like increase in numbers, right? So this was a very, very fun 4 comic miniseries. I really liked it. I like to see the Pathfinders definitely have a little bit more of a stronger role here, a little bit more of like their inventiveness and their connection with the Jedi, like Paco, like how he would sacrifice himself there was really cool. And just like how they were also medical savants, right? They were trying to make sure that whoever they're working with, they're doing the best here. I really like the Jedi Master Shula, right? We've seen Jedi, face down these nameless before and end up succumbing to it pretty quickly. She she doesn't. That's the coolest part for me, right? She escapes because Paco helps her out there, but she loses an arm, right? And it's petrified. It falls away. And it was very cool couple of panels to see that kind of pulled away. And then to see her in her second and last stand. I mean, if there's any Jedi who's really stood up to the Nameless, she's probably top three for sure, right? Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It's a very sad end to the story. I also really like that Ty York was telling this story. A lot of the art style from her kind of graphic novel is very similar to this, but I think there was a little bit more advanced, a little bit more refinement. And seeing her kind of be brought back, not forgotten, was very cool because she's one of the most original like Jedi offshoot characters that we've gotten. And she only really had like two books of interest in that graphic novel. And I really wanted to see her back, and seeing her here was a very pleasant surprise, kind of being the narrator for everything for her droid. Yes, I really liked it. It's a great miniseries. I will give it a 4 out of 5. I think it's not essential, but I think there's like quite a bit of joy and a lot of adventure and excitement that comes out of this.
I agree with a lot of what you said. The Nameless Terror was my second favorite of all of the comics in Phase 2, and I really like what George Mann did here with the story. Similar to how Trail of Shadows takes on a very different type of tone and feel in Phase 1, The Nameless Terror is more of a horror thriller type of feel. This story is in the vein of an Alien type of film where you crash land and you're surviving on a planet away from this creature that's trying to hunt you down. And I really enjoyed that. This also gives us probably our best real look at the levelers outside of concept art and the Nameless. There's some full on shots of the Nameless here, and I thought that was really nice. It was cool at first to really obscure what they look like, but as time's gone on, it would be nice to see them in action, and this is our best shot at seeing them in action so far. So I did enjoy that. George Mann's writing was really solid. The character work all around was good. I did like the Padawan Corrin. I do like the name Corrin. Even though it's spelled differently, I'm glad that name is being brought back for a Jedi character. Rock is a good character, and I liked Rock a lot in Quest for the Hidden City. I thought George Mann did a good job writing that character here, and I like to see him further unfolded. He's a Jedi with a very different personality than most other Jedi Masters, so that was really interesting, still getting to explore that character. Again, like I've been saying with a lot of other authors, George Mann does pick and choose stuff from his previous work to pull here. So if you are a completionist, you'll get stuff out of it. If you've read Quest for the Hidden City, there are a lot of references to things in Rock's past or other things from that book. But overall, I did really like this book. I'm going to give this one a 3.75 also. I thought it was really well done and one of my favorites so far of the initiative. And Dark Horse overall, really good job this entire phase, especially picking up and being a new part of the High Republic. They did a great job with their series that they wrote. Let's talk about the last one here. We have Adventures, the High Republic Adventures, which is the only one here that we're going to talk about that is currently not finished. So we're mostly going to be focusing on Volume 1 or the first 5 issues. The 5th issue is a part of Volume 2. And so we're going to talk about those issues, but there are still 3 more issues coming out as of the time of this recording. So we can't give you a complete look at it, but based on the previews of the rest of Volume 2, it looks like it's all going to be dealing with the Battle of Jeddah. So we can kind of give you a little look at the way this is written and what we think the story will ultimately progress into. This is written by Daniel Jose Older, who wrote all of Adventures for Phase 1. Sanak, what are your thoughts on the High Republic Adventures Phase 2 so far?
Yeah, I like the art style. I like the consistency. It definitely picks up kind of when High Republic Adventures Phase 1 kind of randomly changes its art style before going back. That is the same art style here. And it definitely brings a little bit more of the kiddish feel to the story. I don't know. For me personally, I think after how underrated High Republic Adventures Phase 1 was, I was expecting something great here. There's really not anything outstanding. It's fun, don't get me wrong. You get to see a lot of cool aliens, cool, like you see Lasat, you get to see this guy, a human guy with like spider legs. It's great that we got to have Sam Maligan, that Jedi that we see in Phase 1 in those comics as much younger Padawan, kind of stowing away on this mission with Maz Kanata. And look, I love Maz as a character. I think she was a little downplayed by the end of the sequel trilogy, even though she could have been a very interesting, like, positive underworld influence with the Resistance. But here, getting to see a little bit more of her story and everything, really liked it. But I don't know. It's just the biggest thing about Volume One is that like they're going on this big quest, and then they kind of smack into these pirates, and that's kind of just the whole conflict. Kind of dealing with them and beating them at their own at their own game, kind of getting backstory. Yeah, we do get Dexter Jester, a little younger. That's pretty cool as well. I don't know if this is even like anywhere related to Phase Two. It just so happens to be a Phase One character who's fun supporting character, gets a lot of origin backstory here. Not much else there for me. I personally wouldn't I wouldn't recommend it right now. I think we have to wait till its full run is done, and it is the one that's been coming at kind of the most slowest, most sporadic. As it is right now, I'll give it like a light 3 out of 5.
I feel similarly about most of this. I think this is a fun comic book, and like you were mentioning, Phase One's High Republic Adventures is underrated. It's a well written comic book, but more so than even the writing or anything about Phase One, it's the characters and the characters' arcs throughout the entire run, the way they grow, the way they change, the way they progress from issue one all the way through issue 13 is really strong. And I think it's one of the more complete comics throughout the entire T of Phase One. It where Phase One from Marvel jumps around to different arcs. This one really hones in on characters, and I thought that worked really well. Phase Two, it does do that. It has a small group of characters, but again, with Phase Two, there's a smaller scale stories. There's stories that ultimately don't connect as much to the main books of the initiative, and the connections here, the Battle of Jeddah connections, a lot of it feels kind of shoehorned in. It does feel to be something that's not organically a part of Phase Two, doesn't really want to be a part of Phase Two, but almost like it had to be a part of Phase Two. And in that way, I do think from where I've read up until issue five, I don't know if the Battle of Jeddah is something that needed to be in this story. I do like the characters though. I'm never going to say I don't like something with Therm Scissor Punch and Dexter Jetster in it. So of course it had me with those. But Daniel Jose Older does what Daniel Jose Older does here. It's a lot of snappy, kind of silly dialogue, more sophomoric jokes, and you get the perspective of younger characters here, and that's what he likes to write. And I think he does it pretty well. But if you've read Adventures Phase One, or you've read Midnight Horizon, or Race to Crash Point Tower, it's a very similar writing style, and he doesn't really make each character unique enough from things he did in other material from the High Republic that he's worked on to make this stand out amongst his library of work. So I would say for this, I would also give it a 3. I think it has a chance to maintain that quality. I don't think it's going to go down. And Harvey Talabau, who drew a lot of High Republic Phase 1, Adventures Phase 1, does come back for 5, 6, 7, and 8, I believe. So the art style is kind of ramping up into that more traditional adventures look. But yeah, again, this is definitely the most underwhelming of the stories. I had low expectations for Adventures as usual, but like it didn't reach the expectations I had from that had raised from Adventures Phase 1. So last thing we'll talk about here is the manga. It is the High Republic Edge of Balance Precedent. This does take place after everything else in the initiative, and it is continuing kind of the story from Phase 1's High Republic Edge of Balance, but also flashing back to stuff in Phase 2. Sonic, what were your thoughts on the High Republic Edge of Balance Precedent?
Yeah, I think overall, the Edge of Balance Precedent was a really, really strong step forward for original Star Wars storytelling in manga. Previously, we had published stories then converted into manga, which was nice as adaptations. But the first original stuff that we got, Edge of Balance, was a nice step forward. And yet, it was kind of held back because of COVID delays, so we'd often see the story with the Drengir and the Nile come out months later after seeing in the books and the comics kind of all wrapped up. So seeing this as a prequel story could have been a little boring, but I think they made the right focus this year, and it's pretty awesome, honestly. We have phase one, phase three storytelling happening at the same time. This is definitely an epilogue to everything that happened in phase one with Mark Andro coming to Banshee for a specific thing here with the droid and whatnot that was part of the partnership between Arkoff and his master. I like that droid. He's a little incessant at times, but he ends up having a lot of support and respect for Arkoff and what goes on with his master. All this story is pretty much set as the droid kind of retelling what happened years and years ago at the Battle of Dalna, which the Hetch mercenary, who is working for Mark Rowe, but was once part of the Path of the Open Hand. And we get to see the Battle of Dalna in another perspective. We get to see Arkoff and his fighting with his master and her tenacity, her swordplay, everything of that. That was great. But the best part of this story is that even though Arkoff is the strongest connective tissue here, the main character really is Aslan Rel. Aslan Rel introduced Path of the Sea, kind of doing investigation. We've seen in Quest of the Jedi. Quite good there too, just kind of understanding stuff about the Rod of Daybreak and Rod of Seasons. But here he really gets a full, true role in the story. He gets separated during the Battle of Dalna, and then obviously becomes affected by the Nameless that he runs. He manages to somehow escape, but he gets these dark, crazy visions. He starts saying Shri Karai Karai, writes down these crazy notes, sees Arkoff everyone as like these monstrous, gruesome beings, and he just can't get it out of it. He's mentally broken. The Hetch knows that he has some secrets, some understanding of what's going on with these nameless creatures that he wants for himself. But obviously, Arkoff comes in, saves the day, Aslan also does enough to keep him at bay. And the story comes back to the present. Master Arkoff taking a valuable lesson from his master, striking at the right moment, exactly how you need to do it. It's not anything incredible and like, oh, layered and complex, but this is the first time this felt like genuine Star Wars manga instead of just concept. So yeah, I really liked it. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5.
I really like Edge of Balance Precedent. I think this story does a really wonderful job of tying the entire phase into phase one. It starts in the, if you want to call it the present timeline, the phase one timeline. It takes place after everything else in phase one. So you can kind of, it's that bridge. It's the thing you should read last in this entire initiative, both in comics but also books and everything. So it bridges that gap nicely while also introducing some new characters that are pretty cool in a snappy, fast-paced, cool narrative. Unlike Edge of Balance Volume 1 and 2, the Jedi there, Lily, she is very bland. She's very stoic, and there's a lot of like there's martial arts inspired things about her, but she's also just kind of reserved in that way. She's not, she doesn't do anything or connect to the reader as emotionally as she should. And there's a turning point in volume 2 for her that I think is going to push her forward for volume 3 when we get back to that character. But here we have Master Arkoff, who's I feel like I'm a lot more attached to than Lily, and it's nice to see a bit of his past. But it also deals with Aslan Rel and the fallout from the Battle of Dalna. I won't go too much into the Battle of Dalna in case you haven't read the novels, but essentially this does follow that battle and ultimately the effects of the Nameless on the Jedi and how they're going to deal with that in the future. And I really enjoyed it. I'm glad Edge of Balance at least has some weight and gravitas this time. Previously, Edge of Balance was always the thing that was delayed, and just kind of put out way after the story that it was telling took place, like in when we were dropping the rest of the phase. Like stuff from Edge of Balance Volume 1 takes place way before what we were currently reading at the time when that was dropped, and same with Edge of Balance Volume 2. So it's always felt disconnected. I think here it finally feels connected. And overall, I think the approach to go with a more action heavy, more exciting type of style, more kinetic style, does feed into what makes a lot of the art style of manga great and the medium of manga great. So I really enjoyed this. I would give this one a 3.75 also. I thought this was a really, really big step up from most of what Edge of Balance Volume 1 and 2 were. So that's going to wrap up our review of the comic books here. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button down below. You're subscribing to the channel and you're commenting below letting us know what you thought of all of these comics. Let us know your favorite ones, your least favorite. You can rank them all in order if you'd like to. Let us know your thoughts on all of them. If you'd like to see more comic book content on our channel, let us know. We are considering bringing back more comic book stuff. We have some polls out there for you guys to vote on for what type of content you want to see from us. Let us know. We would like to bring more comics back, maybe for some Legends book clubs here in the future. Thank you so much for watching this video, and of course, stay tuned for the rest of our High Republic content coming over the next week and a half. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.